"Bring the ladders," said his grace, "and then bring me the woman who thinks I owe her money." I had served the Dukes of Coldharrow for 31 years by then, and I had learned to hear the whole of a sentence in the half of it a man says out loud. What Alaric Vane meant was, "Settle it, Barrow, and let us be gone from this house before it remembers us." He stood in the great hall with his gloves still on, his collar still buttoned to the throat, and the dust sheets going up around him like a tide, and he did not look at the ceiling once. 11 years the doors had been shut. 11 years of chalk dust and jackdaws, and a village below that had learned to say the name Coldharrow the way you say the name of a bad winter. Now the house was to be sold, and to be sold it had to be seen, and to be seen it had to be lit, and lit it would show every place where the last Duke had taken his own house apart with his own hands. "There is no woman, your grace," I said. "There is an invoice." Invoices do not write to me twice. He had me there. I had answered the first letter myself in the careful nothing language of stewards, and the second had come back in the same hand on cheaper paper, and it had said a thing that no tradesman's letter had ever said to that house. It had said, "My father finished the work. He was not paid. I am not asking for charity. I am asking for the balance of a contract, and if there is a dispute as to whether the work was done, I will come and show you it was." I remember I read it twice, and then I put it in my pocket instead of the fire, which was the first mistake in this story, and, I have come to believe, the only one worth making. She came up from Chalkmere on foot the next morning in the cold, with a satchel across her back and her boots wet to the ankle, and Mrs. Ferry brought her to the library door and said, in the tone of a woman announcing whether, "The Gilder, your grace." He was reading the terms of sale. He did not rise. I have been asked since what she looked like, and I have never once given an answer that satisfied anybody, because the honest answer is that she looked like a young woman of 24 who had walked 5 miles in January. Brown hair pinned up in a hurry, 3 strands of it escaped, a gray wool dress that had been turned once and would not survive a second turning. A face that was neither beautiful in the way the drawing rooms mean it nor plain in the way they mean that, either, only extraordinarily awake, as if she had come into the room already looking for something and had found 6 of them. "Miss Fenn," said the Duke, still reading. "Your Grace, your father contracted with my father in the autumn of the year 11 to regild the ballroom ceiling of this house. £82, half paid on beginning." "Yes." "My father died in November of that year." He turned a page. "The work was not completed." "It was completed," she said, "in the March following, 10 weeks after he was buried, and by then no one in this house was answering letters, so my father finished it because he had said he would, and he paid for the leaf out of his own pocket, and it cost him his shop." A pause exactly long enough to be heard. "He also died, your grace, last spring, rather quietly and without £82, 41 I should say. I do not want interest." The Duke looked up. "I want to be careful here, because it has become fashionable in the county to say that Alaric Vane fell in love with a Gilder's daughter across a library carpet in the space of a sentence, and that is nonsense, and worse, it is a smaller thing than what happened. What happened was that a man who had spent 11 years arranging his life, so that nobody would ever again ask him for anything, looked at a woman who had just asked him for exactly what he owed and not 1 farthing more, and he could not find, anywhere in his considerable armory, a single weapon that was any use. "There is no record," he said, "of the work being done." "There is a record," said Verity Fenn. "It is on your ceiling." "My ceiling," said the Duke, "is painted over." And that was the first I knew that he knew it. She did not gasp. She set down her satchel, which I recall was the moment I understood we were not going to be rid of her by luncheon, and she said, "Then let me take the paint off, and you may look, and if the leaf is not under it, you owe me nothing and I will walk home. And if it is under it, then you will pay me £41, she said, and I will still walk home." He was silent for a while. The fire ticked. Outside in the courtyard, 2 men were fighting a dust sheet the size of a mainsail. "Barrow," said the Duke, "Your Grace, put her in the ballroom." I should tell you about the ballroom, because everything comes back to it, the way everything in that house came back to it. It was 90 feet long, and it had been the finest room in the county, and above it, in a great oval like the eye of God, the ceiling, not a fresco. Cold Hero had no Italians. What it had from the year 1600 and something was gold, a firmament of gilded leaves and gilded ropes and gilded stars, laid over carved plaster, and set in the center a medallion where, so the story went, every Duchess of Cold Hero had her face worked into the plaster on her wedding day, one within another, like the rings of a felled tree. In the year 11, the 5th Duke had climbed a ladder in the night with a bucket of lead white and a house painter's brush, and he had gone at the medallion until his arms failed. Then he had sat down in the middle of his own ballroom floor, and by morning he was dead, and the doctors said his heart, and the village said other things. His son was 19. The son shut the house. Now the son was 38 and wanted it sold, and in it there stood a Gilder's daughter with a bottle of spirit and a bundle of soft rags, looking up at 140 square feet of her father's last work under her father's contemporary's white paint, and she said to nobody, "Well, all right then." I stayed. I'm not proud of the reasons. A steward with an empty house grows curious the way a dog grows fat. She built her own scaffold out of the estate's ladders and the estate's planks, and rather more of the estate's rope than I care to itemize, and she went up it in a leather apron with her sleeves tied above the elbow, and she began, in a patch the size of a dinner plate, to take a dead man's rage off a dead man's ceiling. It took her 4 hours to clear the plate. When she came down, her hands were shaking too badly to hold the cup Mrs. Ferry pushed at her, and she laughed at that, and drank it anyway with both hands around it like a child, and she said to me, "Mr. Barrow, come and look." I looked. It was a leaf, a single gilded oak leaf, the size of my palm, with its veins struck in and its edge curled as if a wind had just gone over it, and it burned in the gray January light of that dead room like something that had been waiting. "My father laid that," she said, "the last year of his hands being any good. He used to say gold has no worth of its own, it's only a skin, you can beat an ounce of it out over an acre, it weighs nothing, it protects nothing, it can't hold a nail. Its whole worth is what it clings to." She wiped her face and left a smear of white lead across her cheekbone, which I did not tell her about, and which she wore for the rest of the day. He hated this house at the end. But he wouldn't leave a job half done. He said the ceiling never insulted anybody. Behind us in the doorway, the Duke of Cold Hero stood absolutely still. I do not know how long he had been there. He did not come in. When I turned, he had already gone, and his boots made no sound at all on the stone, and that was the second thing I learned about him that winter, that a man may run from his own house without ever once appearing to hurry. She worked 11 days. The county learned of it in 9, because the county learned of everything in 9, and by the 10th we had callers. Lady Adeline Vane, the Duke's aunt, his father's sister, 62 years old and constructed entirely out of black bombazine in the year 1789, arrived with her companion, her physician, and her opinions, and installed herself in the Yellow Saloon as though she had been besieged there, and was determined to be relieved with honors. "He is selling Cold Hero," she said to me, "and he has put a girl on a ladder in the ballroom, and I am told she is unmarried and that he watches her." "He does not watch her, my lady." "Barrow," said Lady Adeline, "I have known you since you were a footman with a bad ankle. Do not lie to me in the Yellow Saloon. It has excellent acoustics." Because here is what I had not said to the Duke, and would not have said to him if he had held a pistol to me, that he had taken to reading the terms of sale in the small drawing-room, which is a cold, unlovely room with one virtue, and the virtue is that its door faces down the enfilade and into the ballroom, that he had asked me twice whether the scaffold was sound. That when Verity Fenn dropped a whole book of leaf from 20 feet, 100 sheets going up and out and turning in the light like a shoal of fish, 100 sheets that cost her more than her dinner for a month. He had said nothing whatever, and the next morning there were 3 books of leaf on the ballroom table, and no one to say where they had come from, and he had spent the whole of that day writing. She would not take them. "I've written it into the account," she told me, "at cost. It comes off the £41. Miss Fenn, His Grace does not want." "Mr. Barrow," she said, from 20 feet in the air, "if I take a gift from that man, then everything I have said in this house since I walked into it becomes a very pretty way of begging, and I have never begged for anything." A rag came down past my ear. "Also, I am nearly at the medallion. Come up." I did not go up. I am 64 and I have a horror of ladders. But I stood beneath it while she cleared the last of the white from the outer ring of the great oval, and I saw the gilded ropes come out of the dark one by one, and I heard her go very quiet, and then I heard her say, in a voice that had nothing at all in it of a tradeswoman discussing a contract, "Oh, Miss Fenn, there's a face," she said. He came, of course. Everybody came. Mrs. Ferry came with her hands in her apron, and 2 of the housemaids came pretending to carry things, and the boy who did the boots came and stood behind the door where he thought I could not see him, and last of all the Duke of Coldharrow came down the enfilade at a walk that fooled no one, and stopped 10 feet inside his ballroom and lifted his head. There was a face in the plaster. It was not finished. The lead white lay over it still, thick as frost, and what Verity had cleared was one cheek, one eye, and the beginning of a mouth. A young woman looking down out of the ceiling with an expression I have never been able to describe except by saying that it was the expression of somebody about to laugh at something private. The Duke made a sound. I have heard men make it in the hunting field when the horse comes down on them. I stepped forward and he put out one hand, not at me, at the air, and I stopped. "Take it off," he said. "Your Grace, take it off." "I cannot," said Verity Fenn from the top of the scaffold, and there was not a scrap of deference in it, and I closed my eyes. "Not today, not the way you mean. The spirit is eating the size underneath. Do you see the dulling there and there? If I go on at that pace I will take the leaf off with the paint and your mother will come off the ceiling in my hand." A breath. "I am sorry. That was badly said." Silence. "I want it done by 12th night," said the Duke. "That is 19 days. "I am aware of the date, Miss Fenn." "Then I want 2 men and a proper scaffold," she said, "and a stove in this room because gold will not lay in the cold, and I want my brother sent for from Chalkmere. He is 19 and his hands are better than mine, and I want the £41 put in writing as owed, whatever else you decide to do with the ceiling or with me." Every soul in that room stopped breathing. The Duke of Coldharrow looked up at his mother's uncovered eye for the space of perhaps 5 heartbeats. "Barrow," he said, "2 men, a stove, send to Chalkmere, and then at the door without turning, and £41 in writing tonight." The boy who did the boots told the kitchen, and the kitchen told the stables, and the stables told the village. And by Sunday there was not a man in Chalkmere who did not know that the iron-gated Duke had been told what to do in his own ballroom by End Fenn's girl, and had said yes 3 times. I must be honest about him, because the county never was. They called him the iron-gated Duke for the gates which he had chained himself at 19, and for the rest of it, the 11 silent years, the letters unanswered, the tenants' petitions returned unopened, the 2 men he ruined in Chancery who had it coming and one who had not. He did not deny any of it. That was the worst of him, and I came to think the whole of him. He would not defend himself. He would not explain. He had watched his father tear the heart out of a house and then die of it, and he had drawn one conclusion from that, that a vein, given a thing to love, will damage it, and that the only decency left to such a man is distance, and the only virtue payment. He paid every debt to the penny. He answered every claim. He shut every door. I had watched him do it for 11 years, and I had thought it was coldness, and it was not. It was terror, dressed for dinner. Now there was a stove in the ballroom, and a girl singing very badly up a scaffold. She sang like a rook, that woman. It was one of the few things about her that was frankly bad. And a 19-year-old boy named Tobin Fenn eating 4 breakfasts a week in my servants' hall, and telling anyone who would listen that his sister had once regilded a cathedral pulpit in a fortnight with a broken wrist, and the house was warm at one end. And every day the ceiling gave up a little more of a woman nobody in that house had been permitted to mention for 11 years. The Duke did not come to the ballroom again. He came to the small drawing room, and he sat with the terms of sale, and he did not sell. On the 8th of the new work, I found him standing in the doorway at 2 in the morning with a candle, alone, looking up. "She has the mouth," he said. I did not answer. There are silences a steward is paid to keep, and this was the first one in 11 years I have ever been glad of. "Barrow, did my mother laugh?" "Yes, your grace." "At what?" "At your father," I said. "Mostly he liked it." The candle shook. He put it down on the pier table and stood with his hands behind his back, the way he stood in Chancery, and he looked up at the half-cleared face of the 4th Duchess of Coldharrow, and after a while he said, "I have offered this house to Sir Marcus Ray. He will pull down this end and put up a conservatory." "Yes, your grace." "The ceiling will be broken up." "Yes, your grace." "Say something else," said the Duke of Coldharrow, "or I shall have to." "And God forgive me," I said. "Then don't sell it, sir." He picked up the candle and went to bed. Nothing changed. Everything did. Now, the 12th night ball, and the thing that the county has told wrong for 6 years, and that I was standing 11 feet from. Understand first that the ball had not been given at Coldharrow since the year 11, and that when the cards went out the county did not RSVP so much as stampede. 400 people, every candle in 3 counties. Lady Adeline came 4 days early to superintend, and superintended chiefly by sitting in the yellow saloon and sending for me. "The custom," she said. "My lady, the ballroom is a building site. The custom, Barrow, is not a matter of housekeeping. It is the reason this family exists." She rapped her stick. "The first Duke was a Gilder." I knew it. Every Coldharrow servant knows it, and no Coldharrow servant is ever unwise enough to say it above stairs. Before there were veins, there was a man who laid gold leaf for the crown and grew rich, and was given a title by a king who owed him money and hated paying it. The custom came down from him, and it went like this, and I set it down exactly as it is written in the household book, because I have had cause to read that page a great many times since. On the eve of Epiphany, in the ballroom, the reigning Duke shall drop his signet into the Gilder's bowl of water, and shall command the room, and the first bare hand that lifts it forth shall be the hand he weds, and no Duke of Coldharrow may forswear it, for the gold was in the water before the name was in the book. It had been kept 11 times. It had been kept, the county liked to remember, twice within living memory, and both times exactly as such customs are always kept. With a bowl set at the feet of the young woman the family had already decided upon, and the young woman informed of the arrangement by her mother, and the whole hall gasping delightedly at a piece of fate they had watched being upholstered for a fortnight. "This year," said Lady Adeline, "it will be Miss Casia Hale." "Does his grace know?" "His grace," said Lady Adeline, "is 8/10/30, and there is no heir, and he has not spoken his mother's name aloud in 11 years, and last week he told me to my face that he was selling the house, and I looked into his eyes, Barrow, and there was nothing behind them at all." Her stick came down. "Miss Hale is sensible, she is handsome, she has 12,000 a year and no romantic notions whatsoever. And she will not ask him to feel anything. It is the kindest thing I can do for him." I have thought about that speech a great deal. I have never entirely decided that she was wrong. I said, "And the bowl, my lady?" "You will place it," said Lady Adeline, "before Miss Hale at the foot of the scaffold, and you will make certain it is the only bowl in the room. At 6 o'clock on the evening of the 5th of January, the ballroom of Cold Hero had 800 candles in it, a floor like brown water, and at the north end still up, still standing, wrapped in green baize for decency's sake, a Gilder scaffold 30 feet high. Verity would not come down. For days, she said, she had been on the scaffold since dawn. Her hands were bandaged at the knuckles because gold size cracks the skin and January cracks it further. The last of it is the eyes, Mr. Barrow, and if I leave the eyes half laid through a night of 800 candles, the wax goes into them and I will never get it out. 4 days and I am done and gone. Tell them to dance under me. I shall not look down. There are to be 400 people, Miss Fenn. Then they will not notice one more, she said, and went back up. I placed the bowl. I placed it exactly where I was told to place it, at the foot of the north scaffold, on a low table draped in white, with the water in it. And I want it understood that I did my duty. I did every part of my duty. I have never in my life done anything else. And at 7 o'clock, Verity Fenn's brother Tobin, aged 19, who had been fetching and carrying up that scaffold for a month, and who had been told by his sister to take her size water down and bring it back clean, took a white-draped low table with a bowl of water on it, from where he found it, and carried it up 2 flights of the servants' stair, because it was the only bowl in the room, and put another in its place. I did not see him do it. Nobody saw him do it. He was 19 and he was hungry and he had 4 breakfasts a week and he had never in his life been in a ballroom. At 8 the county came. At 11:30, the Duke of Cold Hero, who had danced twice, spoken to 100 people and looked at the ceiling not once, stood at the north end of his ballroom with his aunt on his arm, and the room hushed, and Lady Adeline said, in a voice that carried like a bell over ice, "The custom of this house." I saw his face. I want to record that. Whatever he had agreed to in the Yellow Saloon, whatever weariness had brought him to it, when the room hushed and the candles swayed and 400 faces turned to watch him buy his life back with a piece of theater, Alaric Vane looked, for 1/2 of 1 second, like a man watching his own house being painted white. Then he took off his signet. "Miss Hale," said Lady Adeline, and Miss Cassia Hale, who was, I record with respect, entirely sensible, entirely handsome, and had a very good idea of what was expected of her, moved forward and stood beside the low white-draped table at the foot of the scaffold, and folded her hands. The Duke dropped his ring into the bowl. It went down through the water and turned once and came to rest, and it did not sink into water. It sank into Gilder's size, thin, straw-colored, sticky as a hymn, made of parchment glue and left to gel, and it stuck, and it stopped, and it lay there 1/2 an inch under the surface, gleaming. And 30 feet above, on the scaffold, Verity Fenn, who had been lying flat on her stomach on a plank for 11 hours, laying gold in a dead woman's eye by the light of 800 candles, who had heard the hush and had not looked down, because she had promised she would not look down, reached blindly over the edge of the scaffold for the bowl of size that had been in that exact place all day. I saw her hand come down out of the dark, gilded to the wrist with dust, and go into the bowl. I saw it come up. She held it above her head, in the candlelight, without ever once looking, and I do not think she felt the ring at all. One small hard thing among 100 small hard things, a Gilder's hand meets in a day, and she reached back with it towards her brush, and the whole of that gold light caught the signet of the Dukes of Cold Hero stuck fast to the size on the ball of her thumb. 400 people made one sound. I have heard a wave go over shingle. It was like that. Verity looked down. She looked down at 400 upturned faces and 800 candles and a duke and a dowager and a sensible, handsome young woman standing beside an empty white table, and then she looked at her own hand, and I watched her understand it. Not the custom. She knew nothing of the custom, but the shape of it, the way a person understands a thing by the arrangement of the faces below them. "That's not mine," she said. Nobody spoke. She came down the scaffold, 30 feet in a leather apron, with white lead on her cheekbone and her hair coming out of its pins and her hands bandaged, in a room where every woman present had been sewn into her gown that afternoon. She came down badly because she was shaking, and at the bottom she crossed to the Duke of Coldharrow with her hand out flat and the ring stuck to it, and she said, and everyone heard it, the room was so silent that the candles were audible. "Wrong hand." She whispered it. I was 11 feet away, and I heard it as though she had said it into my ear. "Wrong hand," the Gilder whispered. "Wrong bowl. I beg your pardon, your grace. I never meant take it, please, I never." And the Duke of Coldharrow reached out and closed her fingers around his ring. He did it without hurry. He took her wrist in one hand, and with the other he folded her fingers shut over the signet, one by one, over the size and the gold dust and the bandages, and he held them shut. And he looked at her, and I saw his throat move, and he did not let go. "No," he said. "It was Lady Adeline who broke it, Alaric." "The gold," said the Duke of Coldharrow to the room in the voice he used in Chancery, "was in the water before the name was in the book. It is the custom of this house. My family has kept it 11 times when it suited us, with the bowl set where we chose and the hand chosen beforehand." He had not raised his voice at all. "It has never once been kept honestly until tonight." And he lifted Verity Fenn's closed hand, still shut around his ring, so the room could see it, and he said, "No Duke of Coldharrow may forswear it. I do not forswear it. But here is what the county says, that he loved her from the ladder, that it was fate, that the ring found her. Here is what happened, which is better and which took 4 months. She left the house that night. She walked out through the great hall with her satchel and her brother and her contract in the middle of the ball, and she stopped in the doorway and turned around, and she said to a duke in front of 400 people, 'You don't know me, sir. You have never once asked me a question. Whatever you have just done in that room, you did it to your aunt and to your father and to the last 11 years, and I will not be the paint you cover them with.' Then she was gone down the drive in the dark, and Tobin Fenn ran after her with her coat. I found his grace at 4 in the morning in the ballroom, alone, in a room going cold with the stove out, standing under 30 feet of scaffold, looking up at his mother's one finished eye. 'She is right,' he said. 'Yes, your grace. Barrow, I want you to understand that I have been perfectly aware for 11 years of exactly what I am.' His voice was quite level. 'My father loved this house, and he took a brush to it. He loved my mother, and when she died he could not survive it, and he did not do the decent thing and grieve. He went up a ladder to unmake her, because he could not bear a room that had her face in it. I was 19. I have never in my life met the man who could tell me I would not do the same.' He looked at his hand, which was empty, and had been for 6 hours. 'I have spent 11 years making certain there was nothing in this house I could destroy.' 'Sir,' I said, 'you have succeeded. I have never been struck. I record that I fully expected it.' He turned around and he looked at me for a long time, and then he sat down on the bottom step of a Gilder's scaffold in his evening dress, in the ruin of the finest room in the county, and he laughed. It was a terrible sound, and it was, I would swear to it, the first true thing that ceiling had heard in 11 years. 'Fetch me the letter she wrote,' he said. 'The second one, the one you kept in your pocket.' 'Your grace, I never said I.' 'Barrow.' I fetched it. He read it 4 times. Then he said, 'She asks for the balance of a contract, not charity, and if there is a dispute as to whether the work was done, she will come and show me it was.' He folded it. 'I have not paid her. The ceiling is not finished. The contract stands.' He stood up. 'Send to Chalkmere. Ask Barrow. I will have the word ask in the letter, and I will sign it, whether Miss Fenn will consent to finish the work she was engaged for at the agreed sum on the terms that she names, and let her name them.' She named them. She named 4. I have the paper. She wanted the £41 paid to her before she set foot on the scaffold. She wanted her brother indentured to a proper master in London at her own cost, and the estate's introduction. She wanted the ring returned by the Duke's own hand to the Duke's own finger, publicly, before the same room and as many of the same people as could be got there, so that no woman in that county could say she had trapped him, and no man could say he had bought her. And she wanted, in writing, that the house was not to be sold until the ceiling was done and he had stood beneath it, for 1 hour, in daylight, and looked. He signed all 4 before luncheon. He read the last one 3 times. She came back on a Tuesday in the rain, and she did not speak to him for 9 days. She spoke to me a good deal. She spoke to Mrs. Ferry, who adored her, and to the stove when it smoked, in language that would have startled Lady Ottiline out of her bombazine. She worked from first light until the light failed, and then she came down and ate an enormous dinner and slept like the dead in the blue room, because he had put her in the blue room, and she had looked at me when I told her and said, "Where did the last Gilder sleep?" "In the stable loft, Miss Fenn." "Then I shall sleep in the stable loft." "His Grace anticipated that," I said, "and has had it filled with hay." She laughed at that. She laughed all the way up the stairs. It is the only battle in that house I have ever known him to win, and he won it by cheating, and he did not come out of the small drawing-room to see it. On the 9th day the eyes were finished. I was there. I would not have missed it for a pension. She came down and stood at the bottom and looked up, and the whole face was there. The 4th Duchess of Coldharrow, in gold, 30 feet up, looking down out of a firmament of leaves and ropes and stars with her mouth just beginning, at something nobody would ever know, to laugh. Verity said quietly, "N. Fenn did that, 19 years ago, and a man painted it white." Then she sat down on the floor of the ballroom in her leather apron, and put her face in her bandaged hands. I did not see the Duke come in. He must have been in the doorway a long time. He crossed his own ballroom and he stood over her, and he said nothing at all, and then he sat down on the floor beside her, a duke, in a coat that cost more than her father's shop, on the boards with his arms on his knees, and he looked up at his mother, and he did not touch Verity Fenn, then or for a long time after. After a while she said, without lifting her head, "I don't know how to do this." "Nor do I." "You are going to sell this house." "I have not sold this house." "You will. You'll sell it and Ray will bring it down and put in a conservatory, and my father's last work will go into a barrow." She lifted her head. Her face was streaked to the chin. "You are a coward, sir, and you dress it as decency, and I have watched you do it for 6 weeks, and it is the only thing about you I cannot forgive." The Duke of Coldharrow looked up at the ceiling. "Yes," he said. And then I set this down as it was said, because I have never heard a man say anything like it before or since. "Miss Fenn, my father loved everything he broke. He broke it because he loved it and could not bear to be left. I have arranged my whole life so that I would never have anything in it that I could not bear to be left by, and I have been very successful, and it has been 11 years, and I am so tired." He said it perfectly evenly, looking straight up. "I closed the gates. I let the roof go. I sent your father's letters back unopened. I would have let this ceiling go under a hammer, and told myself it was practical, and it was not practical. It was that I could not walk into this room." He turned his head. "And you took the paint off in 11 days. Verity Fenn wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and left gold on her cheek. 12, she said. "You were counting wrong." They courted after that in the way that 2 entirely uncourtly people court, badly, in front of servants, and largely about work. She would not have a gown from him. She had one made in Chalkmere, out of grey silk, with her own money, and Mrs. Ferry wept over it. He would not come up the scaffold because he had a horror of ladders which he had never once mentioned to any living soul, and which she discovered by asking him, plainly, one afternoon, "Why do you never come up?" and being told the truth, and laughing so hard she nearly went over the edge. "Then I shall come down," she said. And she did every hour for a month, so that he might see the work close on a board she carried, a leaf, a rope, a star. and he learned gilding the way a man of 38 learns anything, which is badly and with enormous dignity, and he ruined 11 pounds of leaf in a fortnight, and she made him pay for it at cost and put it in the account. The county was in flames. I shall not repeat what was said. Lady Adeline said all of it to his face in the Yellow Saloon in the last week of February, at a volume that justified everything she had ever claimed about the acoustics, and she finished. She is a tradesman's daughter, Alaric. She has stood on a table in front of the Marchioness of Ilbury. She was mending the pelmet, said the Duke. You will be laughed at. Aunt, he said, I have been feared for 11 years, and it did not stop the roof leaking. Lady Adeline sat down, and then, because she was a vain, and because whatever else she was not a fool, she said, Does she love you? I do not know. Have you asked her? No. Why in heaven's name not? Because, said the Duke of Coldharrow, on the 5th of January I stood in that ballroom and closed her hand around my ring in front of 400 people, and I did not ask her anything, and she was quite right to walk out into the dark. She has had one thing forced into her hand in this house. She will not have a second. There was a silence in the Yellow Saloon. Then you had better ask her, said Lady Adeline Vane, before somebody else does, because Sir Marcus Ray has been to look at your conservatory twice, and he has eyes, and the second time he did not look at the conservatory. Miss Cassia Hale, I should say, behaved throughout with a decency the county did not deserve and has never adequately reported. She called in March. She sat with Verity for an hour. Nobody knows what was said, and both of them refused to the ends of their lives to say, but Miss Hale came out with her chin up, and she stopped in the great hall and shook my hand, which no lady had ever done, and she said, Mr. Barrow, I was going to marry a house. I am extremely relieved, and I intend to be extremely gracious about it, because I shall be insufferable about it later in London, and I want the ground properly prepared. She married a shipowner within the year, and by all accounts terrorized him happily for 40. The ceiling was finished on the 28th of April. The last thing to go on was a star, and Verity would not lay it. She came down and stood at the bottom of the scaffold and held out the tip in the cushion and said, Up you go. Miss Fenn. 30 feet, she said. I will be behind you, and the planks are 2 inches thick, and I have never lost anybody yet. He went up. I could not watch, and I watched. He went up that scaffold rung by rung, a man who had ridden at everything in the county without blinking, white to the lips, and at the top he lay down flat on his stomach on a plank 30 feet above his own ballroom floor, next to a gilder's daughter, and she talked him through it in a low, patient, entirely ordinary voice. Breathe on it, no, on the sighs. Wait for it to go tacky now, don't press, it doesn't want pressing, it wants to be let. And the Duke of Coldharrow laid 1 leaf of gold in the last star of his mother's, sealing with hands that shook so badly that the leaf tore in 3 places. She looked at it. That, she said, is the worst gilding I have ever seen in my life. Yes. It will be there in 400 years. Yes, said the Duke, and put his forehead down on the plank, and laughed until he wept, and she put her hand flat on the back of his neck and held it there, and that is the closest I ever saw them come to an embrace in 11 months, and I have never in my life felt more like a man who ought to leave a room. They did it properly at the last, and they did it in daylight. The 1st of May, the scaffold down, the baize gone, the floor waxed. The ballroom of Coldharrow at 11 in the morning, with the shutters folded back and every window open, and the chalk downs coming in green through the glass, and above it all 140 square feet of gold, leaves and ropes and stars, and in the eye of it a woman looking down and beginning to laugh. He had asked for as many of the same people as could be got there. He got 311, and the whole of Chalkmere, who came up the drive on foot through the open gates. He got Lady Adeline in grey. And he did what she had put in writing. He returned the ring by his own hand to his own finger before the room and said so aloud, The custom of this house was kept by accident, and I hold no woman to an accident. It is returned. Miss Fenn is free of it and of me, and there is not a soul here who can say otherwise." Then he walked the length of his ballroom to where she stood, in gray silk she had paid for herself, with white lead long gone from her cheekbone, and the room held its breath, and I confess that I did too. "Verity," said the Duke of Coldhero, the first time in 11 months that anyone in that house had heard him use it, "I am 8:30 and I have been afraid my whole life. I have nothing to offer you that you have not already mended with your own hands. I will not close the gates again. Ask me for anything and I will not send it back unopened." He took off the ring a second time, and he held it out to her, flat on his palm, and he did not close her fingers over it. He let it lie there in the light, and he said, "Take it or leave it lying, only this time look." She looked at it a long moment, then she looked up at him. "Gold's a skin," said Verity Fenn. "It's worth nothing on its own. You can beat an ounce of it out over an acre. It can't hold a nail, it can't keep out the rain, and it hides absolutely everything." Her voice was not steady at all. "All it's worth is what it clings to." She picked up the ring and closed her own hand around it. 11 years you were painted over," she said. "I've seen what's under. I'll have that and you may keep the gold." They were married in the chapel at Coldhero in June, and the village came, and Tobin Fenn gave his sister away and sobbed like a man being trodden on. She would not have the ballroom for the wedding breakfast. She said the ceiling was her father's, and she would not stand under it in white and have anybody call it a rise. They ate in the long meadow instead, under the down, and it rained for an hour and nobody moved. 3 years later, when the youngest of their children was christened, the plasterers came, as plasterers had come to that house for 6 generations, and Coldhero's new duchess climbed a scaffold with her own tools and worked her own face into the medallion, in among the others, one within another, like the rings of a felled tree. She put it at the edge, not the center. "So she keeps the middle," she said when I asked. "It was her house first. I am 72 now, and I sit a great deal, and they let me sit in the ballroom because the light is good and the stove is close, and the 6th Duke of Coldhero, who is not called the Iron-Gated Duke and never will be, and whose gates have not been shut in a decade, and who cannot lay a leaf of gold to save his life, brings me my tea himself when the footmen are busy, and stands a while and looks up. He is always looking up. And when he does, I think of a January morning and a woman with wet boots and a satchel, saying, 'I am not asking for charity, I am asking for the balance of a contract.' And I think that in 31 years of service to that family, I have never seen a thing more like a miracle than a duke who paid a debt of £41 and got back everything he had ever loved." She sings still, badly up ladders. He listens as though it were a choir,